Picture a small round building, about the size of a garden shed, made of mud and stone. There is only one problem with that picture. Its floor doesn't sit on the ground. It's raised up on wooden beams, lifted a few inches into the air, so a breeze can move underneath it. Inside, packed nearly to the roof, is grain. Thousands upon thousands of seeds, cleaned and dried and waiting out the year. It looks exactly like part of a farm. It sits at the edge of a settled village. Nobody here farmed. Not in this village, not yet, not for a long time. The people who built this and filled it to the brim would not deliberately plant a crop for another 1,000 years. They were storing a harvest that no one had sown. That building is real. It stands at a site called Duara, on a terrace above the Dead Sea in Jordan, and it's roughly 11,300 years old. And to understand why it should stop you in your tracks, you have to unlearn something you've probably always assumed. That storing food is a thing that came after farming. It feels obvious. You grow a surplus, so you need somewhere to keep it. Pantry, granary, silo, refrigerator. The warehouse is farming's child. Except at Dra, and at a string of sites like it, the warehouse came first. The building for keeping the harvest was standing empty, waiting, before anyone had a farmed harvest to put in it. The archaeologists Ian Queech and Bill Finlayson published these granaries in 2009 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That raised floor was a piece of engineering, built to let air circulate underneath and to keep rodents out of the grain. The buildings sat between houses that held stone tools for grinding and processing, and their conclusion was blunt. This is large-scale, purpose-built storage, and it beats the domestication of plants by at least 1,000 years. They called it a critical shift in the whole relationship between people and the plants they ate. Let's rule out the easy explanation right away, because storing food, in the loosest sense, is not new, and it is not clever. A squirrel buries a nut. A wolf gorges and then goes days without eating. Simple caching is old, and it is everywhere in the animal world. The real question isn't whether ancient people ever set food aside. Of course they did. The question is when they began to do it deliberately, at scale, with buildings and long-range planning, when it stopped being a reflex and became a strategy. And the answer runs far deeper into the past than those Jordanian granaries. Go back to Ohalo II, a camp on the shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, drowned by the lake, and then revealed again when the water dropped. It's about 23,000 years old, more than twice the age of Dra. The archaeologist Donnie Nadell excavated the floors of 6 brush huts there, and in one of them, around a grinding stone, lay something extraordinary. Roughly 90,000 charred seeds, wild wheat, wild barley, and dozens of other plants, gathered, carried back, processed, and kept. These people harvested from more than 140 different plant species, and they were cutting grain with some of the earliest known sickles, flint blades set into handles. And grain is almost designed to be stored. Seeds don't rot the way meat does. Dry them, clean them, keep them from damp, and they will last for years. These foragers had already worked that out. In 2015, a team led by Einit Snare published an analysis in the journal PLOS One, showing that they were even tending wild stands of grain, the very first flickers of cultivation, 11,000 years before farming supposedly began. That's not a quick snack by the lake. That's a household managing a food supply. Here's where it gets colder and stranger. Move to the Ice Age plains of what is now Ukraine and southern Russia, to the world of the mammoth hunters around 24 to 21,000 years ago. At sites like Gonsi and Kostenki, archaeologists have found deep pits dug into the ground right beside dwellings framed with mammoth bone. And here the ground itself is the technology. Below the surface sat permafrost, soil frozen solid year-round, and a pit cut down into it becomes a natural cold store. Digging into frozen earth is brutal, deliberate work, and they did it anyway, because it paid. Fill a pit in the cold months and the meat keeps deep into the summer. By one estimate, a single mid-sized mammoth could feed a band of 50 people for something like 3 months. So they weren't just killing to eat that night. They were caching against the lean season, using the frozen earth as a walk-in freezer, 20,000 years before the electric one existed. But you don't need permafrost to beat time, and this is where human ingenuity really shows. At Karane IV, a sprawling open-air site in eastern Jordan, archaeologists found lines of post holes that appear to be the remains of racks, and a pattern of gazelle bones consistent with meat being dried, smoked, and sealed in fat for later. The study, led by Andrew Gerard and colleagues and published in 2019, was titled, wonderfully, Meat Outside the Freezer. No cold required. Just smoke, air, and fat to lock out decay. And this is the deeper trick of all of it. Preservation doesn't only keep food. It transforms a sudden glut you could never eat in time, a run of fish, a herd of gazelle, a whole mammoth, into a steady reserve you can draw down for months. Feast for a week or food for a season. The difference between those two things is technology. And then there is my favorite example, from a lake in southern Sweden called Norge Sunansund, about 9,200 years ago. There, the archaeologist Adam Boethius excavated a pit holding the bones of an estimated 200,000 fish. The chemistry and the layout point to something specific. The fish were fermented, deliberately allowed to sour in a controlled way, and stored. Boethius, writing in the Journal of Archaeological Science, called it the world's earliest known evidence of fermentation. These were hunter-gatherers, with no farms and no salt, running a large-scale food operation on the shore of a lake. Now the picture gets richer, because storage doesn't just change your calendar. It changes where you can live. Think about the Natufians, the people of the Levant between roughly 15,000 and 11,500 years ago. They built stone houses. They cut wild grain with flint sickles and ground it with heavy stone tools. They dug storage pits, and at sites like Abu Huraira in Syria, they harvested wild cereals so intensively that they could stay in one place year-round. They are often described as one of the world's earliest complex hunter-gatherer societies, and storage is a big part of why. Because here is the hinge. A band that eats only what it can find has to keep moving, following the food. But a group that can store has a reason to stay, to sit on top of its supply and guard it through the seasons. And once you stay put, everything else starts to change. You can build heavier houses. You can own things too bulky to carry. You can have more children, closer together, because you're no longer hauling them across the landscape. Archaeologists call this a delayed return economy, a phrase from the anthropologist James Woodburn. And the Natufians are one of the earliest clear examples. People who invested labor now for a payoff weeks or months later. Storage is what let humans stop wandering and put down roots. Literally, right next to the food. And this is where it turns genuinely profound, because a full storehouse is not just calories. It's a new kind of object in the world. It's wealth. Think about what a pile of stored grain actually is. It can be counted. It can be owned. It can be defended, inherited, lent, and traded. It sits still, and it holds its value. The anthropologist Alain Testart, in a landmark 1982 paper in the journal Current Anthropology, argued that large-scale food storage was one of the great hinges of human history. That once societies began storing intensively, you get the raw ingredients for permanent settlement, for population growth, and for something that had been rare among mobile foragers, durable inequality. When food is shared out the day it's caught, it's hard for anyone to get rich, and hard to hold on to more than your neighbor. But when it's locked in a granary with your name on it, some people can have more than others, and keep it, and pass it on to their children. A storehouse is the first thing a person can be richer in. Now, in fairness, this is a live argument, not a settled fact, and plenty of researchers push back on it. The archaeologist Bill Finlayson, one of the excavators of Dra itself, has argued that early storage may often have been communal rather than private, and that some of the earliest farming communities stayed remarkably egalitarian for a very long time. A granary doesn't automatically produce a ruling class. Surplus makes inequality possible. It doesn't make it inevitable. So hold that tension honestly. Storage opened a door. It didn't force anyone to walk through it. But here is the reframe that changes how you see all of it. Every one of these acts, the grain in the granary, the meat in the frozen pit, the fish souring in the mud, is the same gesture. It is a bet on the future. To store food is to take something you could eat right now, today, while you are hungry, and instead choose to defend it, uneaten, for a version of you that doesn't exist yet. It's an act of imagination as much as engineering. The ability to see next winter clearly enough to sacrifice for it now. That is not a pantry. That is our species learning to trust tomorrow. And once you can save, you can plan. Once you can plan, you can plant. The granary at Drop didn't come after farming. It's beginning to look like farming came, in part, out of the granary. That the habit of storing a harvest is what eventually made people bother to grow one. So let's lay the timeline back out. 23,000 years ago, a household at Ohalo 2 grinds and keeps wild grain by a lake. Around 20,000 years ago, mammoth hunters pack meat into frozen pits on the Russian plains. 19,000 years back, foragers at Karenay 4th dry and smoke gazelle on wooden racks. 15,000 years ago, the Natufians settle down beside their storage pits and stop moving. 9,000 years ago, Swedish fishers ferment 200,000 fish in a single pit. And 11,300 years ago at Dara, people raise a purpose-built granary up on stilts before they'd farmed a single thing. Not one invention, but the same idea, discovered over and over, everywhere humans lived. Keep some back. We are, it turns out, extraordinarily good at this bet. So good that we've now scaled it up to the whole species. On a frozen island near the North Pole, in a tunnel drilled deep into a mountain on Svalbard, sits a vault that opened in 2008. Inside it, at temperatures far below freezing, are more than 1 million samples of seeds from nearly every food crop on Earth. A backup of our entire agricultural inheritance, stored against war, disaster, and collapse. It is carved into rock that stays frozen on its own, so that even if the power fails and the world forgets it, the seeds stay cold. It is a granary for the whole planet, and it is the exact same instinct that raised that little building above the Dead Sea, now wearing 11,000 years of technology. The same refusal to eat everything today. The same quiet bet that there will be a tomorrow worth feeding. And you make that bet too, without ever thinking about it. Look in your kitchen, the freezer with the leftovers you'll eat next week. The pantry holding more than tonight requires. The cans at the back of the cupboard you're keeping just in case. Every one of them is a message to a future version of you. The same message a hunter-gatherer sealed into a frozen pit 20,000 years ago. I am setting this aside. I believe you'll be here to need it. The granary is one of the most human things we ever built, because it isn't really about food at all. It's about believing in the future enough to save for it. All the research is linked in the description.